This is Marco Reus.
This is Shinji Kagawa.
This is Nuri Shahin.
Hello, this is Jadon Sancho.
And you're listening to the Yellowwallpod.
Hello and welcome to episode 469 of the Yellowwallpod. I'm your host, Butzko, and today we will talk about Ademi and Madsen scoring against Union Berlin, Dortmund qualifying for the FIFA Club World Cup, and players are to return from injury as BVB travel to Bremen. For all that and more joins me Lars Pollmann. Hello Lars, how are you doing?
Hello Stefan, I'm not sure I appreciate the pregnant pause after 469, which...
I was waiting for you to say nice, but you didn't, so...
I'm sorry. How are you, Stefan?
That was sort of in case you wanted to slide in there, say it. But you know, I'm doing fine. Thank you. Right, Borussia Dortmund, Union Berlin. Right, that game was like 800 years ago, to be honest, and I don't recall much of it other than there were gifs on Twitter floating around of Emre Can passing it to the opponent right in front of his own box. Let's talk about that first before we talk about the positives. Lars, Dortmund certainly did not have the nicest game in Berlin, but I think it was a good bounce back after the horrendous loss at home to Hoffenheim. This time Emre Can returned to midfield and Dortmund did not concede a goal. However, things look as poor and terrible as most of this calendar year, if I'm honest. If you have any recollection of the midfield and Emre Can once again not really performing as he should, please talk about it.
I'm not sure I would categorize this game as a bounce back in any other sense than the fact that they won 3 points against an Union side, which I think if you look at the league table looks a bit weaker than they are actually. I think they've been on a decent run of form ever since switching to Nenad Bjelica as the head coach. I think they are in the top half for 2024 or whatever. So it's not like going to Union is one of the easier trips. So coming away with 3 points is always appreciated, obviously. But the performance itself, I don't think there's much of an argument to be made that it was a huge step up from the Hoffenheim game or a couple of these other games they've played in the last few weeks. I think we basically know who Dortmund are at this point of the season. There's not much to surprise us in a positive or I suppose in a negative sense. So I guess the only thing that really stood out to me, and maybe it's just because I never really thought about it, but I think you could make the case that Alexander Meyer is Dortmund's most improved player from last season, because last year I was not particularly happy with him, and I think he was the best player on the pitch even against Union. And when you're winning 2-0 away from home and you have to praise the goalkeeper, I think that says a lot, even though he didn't actually have too much to do, but whenever he did, he looked very solid, good on the ball, and had that one massive save when I think Madsen gave it away somewhat carelessly. So yeah, I mean, I'll be amazed if we spend more than 10 minutes on this game.
Yeah, Alex Meyer had a few really good saves in goal. I think right at the beginning he had one where he just touched it with the outside of his boot and steered it around the post, if I recall correctly. But I mean, for a backup goalkeeper, I don't know where you would rank him, but I think I would go as far as saying he's probably better than Mitch Langerek. What would you say?
I mean, Langerek had the fortune of playing some big games for Dortmund, which obviously kind of skews our view of what he did, because when he had the chance to replace Weidenfeller for an extended period of time, I don't think necessarily that anyone thought back then that Langerek was going to be a long-term number one for Dortmund, which obviously we don't think about Meyer either. But I mean, the more interesting question to me is probably how many Bundesliga teams he would start for, because obviously Meyer came from Jan Regensburg, who are now down in 3rd division. It's not like that's a powerhouse of the 2nd Bundesliga or whatever. And considering that, and also that he's already quite, I don't want to say old because he's younger than me, but for Dortmund perspectives,
not mutually exclusive anymore.
for Dortmund perspectives, he's reasonably old. I think that you could probably point out at least 7 or 8 Bundesliga sides where Meyer would start, and that's kind of a bonus when you think back to times when they had, for example, Bürki and Hitz, which at the end of that particular era, if you want to call it that certainly wasn't good enough anymore. And I think right now Kobel and Meyer is quite arguably, or could arguably be the best 1-2 punch in the Bundesliga. So that's, if we are to look for some positives here, which is not necessarily our one, Stefan, then I guess the goalkeeping situation is a positive.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, Marvin Hitz, I totally forgot about him, if I'm honest, but I think he was a very decent number 2 goalkeeper as well. I think traditionally Dortmund do have very good goalkeepers and also good backups, I would say, for the most part, at least in the last 10 to 15 years. I think that holds true. So, yeah, I mean, Alex Meyer obviously now had a bit of a rhythm going, which of course helps too. But for Bremen, as we'll preview it later, Gregor Kobel will probably return to goal, and hopefully there won't be any weird rusty moments. But in the meantime, should mention Adeyemi had an absolute screamer of a goal, cutting inside from the right side of the box and then hitting the underside of the crossbar, which I think are always very beautiful goals. And Ian Maatsen then with the dagger, was it stoppage time or just before it, winning the ball high up, pressing by himself almost as the lone striker, and then just running toward goal, taking a little pause before putting it away with enough power and placement. So all in all, at least for what when it comes to the goals scored, I think Dortmund did pretty well. Outside of that last, though, I don't really recall too many good chances that Dortmund had in this game where I say, well, these were absolute sitters that they had to bury. Correct me if I'm wrong here, but I don't really recall much.
No, I mean, it's not beyond the realm of possibility that we were just forgetting about it, because the game has been a few days ago and it wasn't particularly memorable. But yeah, I certainly remember feeling or thinking when Adeyemi scored, that certainly didn't announce itself beforehand, if you will. And then obviously when Maatsen scored, that was a counter-attacking moment that can happen at the end of the game when the opponent is chasing the game. It's not like Union had a firework of scoring opportunities themselves going. So it was just one of those games where
you need to score first.
Yeah, really. and ultimately, I think if the game had ended in a draw, none of the sides could have particularly been aggrieved with that. Maybe even a 1-0 Union victory wouldn't have been totally against the run of play or whatever, and ultimately Dortmund won. And it's one of those games that I think it's going to be hard to remember even in 2 weeks, let alone at the end of the season or whatever. But obviously, those count as well.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, arguably the loss to Hoffenheim was pretty terrible, considering the. I don't know if it is too soon to talk about the word, use the word run in. But either way, considering that Dortmund do have a pretty difficult schedule from here on out, these were definitely a must-win game, especially after you come back from a 1-goal deficit, then really control the game, and then in the second half to lose it and pretty much collapse within minutes. Not really helpful, and really goes to show how frail this Dortmund team is currently. But it is, at least result-wise, a good bounce back, because Dortmund do stay with the skin of their teeth in 4th place, 1 point ahead of RB Leipzig, who select someone else. I think it was Bochum. And so on. Yeah, we'll move on to Bremen. But before we do that, last, real quick, I think we should mention that due to Real Madrid winning against Leipzig in the Champions League round of 16, Dortmund now have qualified for the FIFA Club World Cup, which I think is in 2025 next year in the United States, and is sort of a, I guess, a rehearsal dinner for the real thing. And I'll be honest, I'm hopeful Dortmund for some reason somehow played Philadelphia. That'd be amazing. But I personally am actually quite excited about this tournament. I think I've talked about that before. Lars, it's a bit similar to the old World Cup format with 32 teams, if I'm not mistaken, and it's going to be in July, and it's going to be a little bit bigger. And I think the windfall for Dortmund is around 50 million or something ridiculous. So obviously it deserves mentioning, because that's definitely no small thing to be qualified for this sort of tournament. But what are your thoughts on it?
Well, first of all, the actual financial details haven't been made public yet, so we don't exactly know how much they make. The number of 50 million as just an entry fee has been floated, but I'm somewhat cautious going with that, because it might quite easily be a bit below that.
Might be 5.
I mean, it's very likely from all you can read and whatever to be in the double-digit millions, which nice to have. Obviously, it's like an extra transfer or whatever you can afford. Obviously, it's not that simple, but in layman's terms, the Philadelphia thing is nobody knows yet where the tournament is actually going to take place, because those details haven't been made available either. I'm pretty sure it's not going to be pan USA. I think it's more likely to be one region. I don't know, California, Florida, maybe the Northeast, so Philadelphia, New York, Boston, whatever, or Foxborough, I suppose. And ultimately, I think it beats, a preseason tour to the US, because they get much more money for it, and the games are a bit more interesting and important. Obviously, I think a lot of traditionally minded fans will not necessarily be happy with another new competition that takes a team in preseason, ultimately, that is still preseason, away from Germany. So even fewer opportunities to play against local sides in preseason friendlies and all that, fewer opportunities for fans to be around the team in Germany, or even in training camp in Switzerland or whatever, because I'm pretty sure they're not going to have in 25 one of those longer preseason camps, because that's just quite difficult logistically if you plan on spending however long the Club World Cup is supposed to be, which I'm not sure there's a preliminary schedule or whatever. At the end of the day, I'm kind of open to it. I think it's kind of a European arrogance almost to think of the Club World Cup or those competitions in general as, lesser and unimportant or whatever. Because when you speak to, for example, fans from Southern America, they are hugely into the Club World Cup as it is now, with the Champions League winner, the Copa Libertadores winner from Southern America, and obviously they have more spots in that tournament now, and it's also quite big in Asia from what I know. So I think it makes sense for us to be open-minded to it, and ultimately it's something that points out Dortmund as one of the better teams in Europe. It's quite a bit of money, however much it's going to end up being, and I don't see necessarily how that's a bad thing.
No, absolutely not. I personally, I think it's actually a great idea. I think to have more competitions between clubs that are meaningful from all over the world to come together, and if it's I don't know if it's going to be annually. I presume it is.
No.
I think, is it going to be every 4 years?
Because otherwise, I mean, you can't do a 32-team tournament every year, and I mean, that logistical nightmare.
Well, even better. That makes it even more meaningful, to be honest. Yep. So I think it's a good idea. There are so many reforms from FIFA I disagree with, and I'm just thinking, okay, it's going to put more strain on players, and it's going to be an obvious money grab. And I think you can argue the same here, but I actually am for it. I think it's good, and it's going to advance world football in some ways or form, and maybe add a little excitement. Anyway, we can talk about that more later. We have the very important game coming up. So important that I have not even looked in the schedule what day it exactly
Saturday
is.
evening Germany time.
There you go. So it is the late kickoff. It is the Topspiel for whatever reason. Guess just because it's two clubs with tradition going at each other. I mean, Werder Bremen right now, where are they in the table? I haven't checked, but can't be high.
8th or 9th, I think.
Yeah, somewhere in midfield.
Yeah. Which isn't bad for a team that was promoted for last season, because
that is true.
There's this supposed curse of the second season after promotion, which, I mean, as most curses statistically isn't proven by any means, that teams often make it to their second season but not their third season after promotion. But Bremen, despite losing, for example, Niklas Füllkrug, and having a bit of a downturn in form, especially in autumn, I think have they actually lost in 20? Yeah, they lost home to Heidenheim on their Jubilee game when they celebrated.
Yeah, they nearly lost to Darmstadt, didn't they?
Yeah, they should have, but were saved by one of those ridiculous, the hand touched the ball, and if you score a goal, that doesn't count, whereas that would never be a penalty kind of situations.
Yes.
You know the type.
Very, very weird. Yes, exactly. Yeah, I'm intrigued by it. Obviously, my favorite curse, football curse, will be in action. I should qualify that. It's the curse of the X, of course, due to Niklas Füllkrug returning to Bremen. And we'll see if he can continue his scoring run that he is on right now. He is. I mean, he got an assist for the Adeyemi goal. I'm not sure if I would count that, but fair enough. But yeah, he is doing pretty well right now, in form. Other than that, as I said previously, Gregor Kobel will probably return to goal, and I think, as it was, except for Alea, everyone else will be fit. As well, so that also means Felix Metscher is going to return to the matchday squad. I highly doubt that he is ready to start, considering how long he is out, and he has been in team training for 2 weeks, I think, right? Something like that, like 1.5 at this point, but by the time they, I think, play, it would be 2 weeks, even though I think Terzic on the press conference last week said he was sort of doing Monday, Wednesday, Friday, sort of, so they have been rather careful with him, but nevertheless, that could be a boost somehow as well if he gets maybe 20 minutes, because I've railed on against Emre Can for quite a while, and maybe if we can put Sabitzer and Metscher in midfield as a double pivot, I could rest a little easier. I'm not too sure. What would you think? Going forward, if Metscher is resourced to full health, where would you see him in midfield? Do you think that double pivot would be a feasible option?
I mean,
or is Sabitzer too it's too attacking?
I just don't think Sabitzer has the I don't know,
offensive prowess.
I think Terzic has quite often tried to put Sabitzer in that hole in front of the fence, mostly I guess because they were chasing games or whatever, because typically he likes to play either Can or Özcan, so a more dedicated defensive or holding midfielder than Sabitzer. I think he can play that in a pinch, but I don't know necessarily that you ever enter a game thinking that Sabitzer is your best option in defensive midfield. I'm also, so far, I don't think Felix Metscher has shown us enough to just pencil him in as a starter for whatever reason. I mean, he definitely has potential, but obviously he's now also missed, 3.5 months? Oh, I think he played last in November or something. Then he had this weird hip issue, which never as is customary in Dortmund, hasn't really been clarified to the public what it actually is. And you know, is it just a matter of pain tolerance, or do they fear, you know, other injuries coming from that or whatever?
It just got completely replaced. We just don't know it.
I mean, if that works, who am I to say? I don't know that Netscher has shown anything so far to just assume that he's going to make a massive difference towards the end of the season. I think whenever a young player who has really, you know, gotten used to playing for a club anyway. I mean, the first few months of Netscher at Dortmund were up and down at best. When he's out for that long, I think anything you get from him till the end of the season kind of has to be considered a bonus, and then you hope that going into his second year with possibly a full summer of preparation, because I think it's highly doubtful that Netscher is going to the Euros in the summer. You hope that he can reach his considerable potential in the second season. So I think more likely we will still see Emre Can or Salih Özcan in defensive midfield, and just cross everything we have, all the fingers, all the toes, that they sign a defensive midfielder that doesn't give you a heart attack every week or makes you shake your head so much that you get a concussion.
Yeah, very much agreed. I don't know if I have that many other things to say. Looking forward to the Bremen game, if I'm honest. We can talk about the lineup and how it's going to be, but I'll be honest, I don't think it makes such a big difference. If you have any musings there, be my guest. But I have a much more interesting subject. It's a little bit old now, but nevertheless, after the Berlin game, I think Sebastian Kehl was in the Doppelpass and had this remarkable sentence that Dortmund sort of made Bayern struggle so much that now Bayer Leverkusen are the profiteers from that. I think we can both agree that this statement is probably complete nonsense, but I think it is certainly something we need to talk about in the aspect that I think Sebastian Kehl is saying a lot of weird stuff recently, and it's giving me the ick. I don't know how you feel about it, but it makes me feel uncomfortable, and I don't know. I've seen it more and more. It's obviously not clear that the Dortmund officials are getting ridiculed on the internet for the things they're saying. But I don't know how you feel about it. I just feel it'd be nicer if representatives of the club wouldn't say stupid shit all the time. What are your thoughts, Lars?
I mean, I've only seen the memes about that stuff. I didn't.
It says it all.
Yeah, I'm not gonna.
I mean, maybe it's unfair and he was taken out of context.
I'm assuming that there was a bit more to it than saying that Leverkusen are going to be champions because Dortmund,
obviously
weakened Bayern last season. I think I also think there's something to that, obviously, because Bayern definitely aren't up to their usual standards this season, and they weren't for the latter stages of last season. And maybe if they hadn't won the title on the match day that shall never be mentioned again, maybe they would have made more substantial changes then already. I mean, obviously they got rid of Oliver Kahn and Hasan Salihamidzic, but Tuchel stayed on, and outside of Harry Kane, they didn't really, and I guess Min-Jae Kim, who hasn't been great so far, but they didn't go for that defensive midfielder that Tuchel always wanted, and they fumbled the bag with João Palhinha on deadline day in the summer. And I don't know if we can quantify how much of that is down to their winning the title on the final match day of last season, how much of it is down to them thinking that Dortmund is the big opponent this season again. Maybe Leverkusen sprang a surprise on them or whatever. So I think obviously it's much more down to Leverkusen having an incredible season and Bayern being subpar, but I think there's an argument to be made that Dortmund have something to do with it. And obviously, while I haven't seen the appearance in the talk show that you mentioned, I'm sure Kehl said some things that weren't stupid there, but on a more general note, I definitely do agree that neither Kehl nor Hans-Joachim Watzke are giving off the best impression over the last few weeks. I think the same can be said for Edin Terzic, but that's, I guess, more debatable because obviously he's talking about football stuff more often than those guys who are talking in more general terms. The issue I have right now is considering that Watzke wants to leave or is leaving in autumn 25, but doesn't want to have control of day-to-day football operations from this summer onwards. Everything kind of points to Kehl being promoted into a more senior role, as it were, and I don't know necessarily that he has the track record so far as sporting director at Dortmund that would warrant that kind of promotion, as it were. But then again, I think Freddy Röckenhaus, the Dortmund insider who's buddies with Watzke from Süddeutsche Zeitung, which is a regional paper from southern Germany, but they have a pretty good idea of what's going on at Dortmund because, as I said, Röckenhaus likes and Watzke and vice versa. I think they made the point that it would make sense for Kehl to be promoted and for a dedicated sporting director with more of a transfer nous to be installed. So there's a lot of talk about Sven Mislintat coming back to Dortmund. I think if we have any followers of Ajax listening to our podcast, they would probably tell Dortmund to stay away from Mislintat because he likes to give out weird contracts to people he's in business with and all that stuff. But I think the track record of Mislintat in a purely transfer market sense, for example at Stuttgart, but also back at Dortmund for a time at Arsenal as well, I think that's a pretty good track record, and I think it would make some sense to have Kehl in a more senior role, maybe a bit more of an oversight role perhaps. And he's obviously smart. He knows the club inside out, but he hasn't really shown too much in terms of the transfer market. So maybe the addition of a dedicated sporting director instead of Kehl in that regard would end up being a net positive. So there's pros and cons to everything, but at the end of the day, I definitely agree that the public impression from the higher ups, to put it more general, hasn't been the greatest in the last few weeks and months.
Yeah, I would agree with that sentiment. So sort of something we probably need to keep our eye on. But Lars, I'm planning on doing a podcast after the Bremen game and before the PSV return leg. But just in case we don't, maybe 2 thoughts on that second leg from you before we get out of here.
I mean, the performance in the first leg wasn't great, but they arguably should have won because that wasn't necessarily a penalty for PSV. Even though I kind of understand why it was given, and the implementation of VAR in UEFA competitions is quite weird compared to, for example, Bundesliga. So while I don't agree with the call, I kind of understand why that is considered a penalty in the Champions League. But that's by the by. I think Nico Schlotterbeck kind of said that, with the return leg at Dortmund, there's absolutely no question whatsoever that they're going to go through. So I'm optimistic to see them put their money where their mouth is, because it would be kind of a shame to go out against, with all due respect, PSV, because ultimately that's not one of the 8 best sides in Europe. Obviously Dortmund aren't either on the evidence of this season, but they are closer to that status. So kind of expecting the quarterfinals, to be honest, and with that kind of draw. And as I said, they have to put their money where their mouth is.
Yeah, I do believe that if Adeyemi manages to stay injury-free against Bremen, which obviously is somewhat of an if, I think he will play a deciding role in that game, because I do believe that his speed in the Champions League is, even if that makes sense, a bit more valuable, and he has a track record of scoring important goals in that competition. So I I don't know. I just have the feeling that he'll be in the score sheet somewhere, and yeah, I do hope that Dortmund do go through. But obviously, right now with this team, there are no guarantees whatsoever. They can collapse on a whim without any pretense, but at the same time, they could also completely steamroll PSV at home because, I mean, PSV did not play their best in the first leg. And you could see that the gulf in individual quality is pretty significant, and Dortmund could make that count. So yeah, we'll see how that goes. Hopefully a bit more in-depth preview of that game before we return. But nevertheless, Lars, thank you so much for coming on today. And if you don't have enough of me yet, I'll also be later on the BVB podcast with Carver and Jack. So you can tune into there as well, and we'll see what questions I'll be faced there and not just be the host and ask questions. So yeah, anyway, Lars, thank you for coming on. Everyone out there, as always, thank you for listening, and we shall be back hopefully next week after the Bremen game. Until then, have a good weekend. Goodbye.